Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, let us take a slow and gentle journey into the past. Imagine yourself stepping softly into the 16th century during the reign of the Tudors, when castles stood tall across the English landscape. They were not just strongholds of stone and timber, but also living spaces filled with the quiet rhythm of daily life. Behind heavy doors and winding staircases, people worked, rested, and carried out their routines in ways that may surprise us today. Together, we will explore what it was like to live inside a Tudor castle, not through loud battles or royal drama, but through the small, ordinary details that shaped each day. Before we begin, how are you feeling right now? Perhaps you are lying in bed, ready to close your eyes, or maybe you are simply searching for something calm to ease your mind. From which country are you listening, and what time is it where you are? Wherever you may be, I am glad you are here. If you enjoy these quiet history stories, please remember to like this video, subscribe, and gently tap the notification bell so you never miss a peaceful journey into the past. Now, let us step through the castle gates. The first impression of a Tudor castle might have been overwhelming. Towering walls surrounded the grounds, their grey stone rising above the landscape. Large wooden gates creaked as they opened, and narrow windows, built for defense, peered out like watchful eyes. Yet, once inside, the scene shifted from cold strength to the warmth of human life. Voices echoed across the courtyard, footsteps rang on cobblestones, and the castle revealed itself not only as a fortress, but as a busy home. The courtyard was the heart of this activity. Servants carried baskets of food, workers mended tools, and children sometimes played when no one stopped them. Horses stamped in their stalls, and the smell of fresh hay mixed with the scent of smoke drifting from the kitchens. Though the walls were thick and the stone unyielding, the presence of people gave the space a sense of movement and familiarity. It was not just a place of defense, but a place of living. One of the most striking features inside was the Great Hall. This vast chamber was often the largest room in the castle, where members of the household gathered for meals, meetings, and important events. Wooden tables stretched in long rows, with benches for servants and attendants. At the far end, raised slightly above the rest, sat the lord and his family, who presided over the daily rhythm of the household. The great hall was not silent. It carried the hum of voices, the scrape of cups, and the crackle of fire. The fireplace was a source of warmth, light, and comfort. Its flames chased away the chill of stone walls, while the smoke drifted upward into the high beams of the ceiling. In those moments, people were reminded that warmth itself is a blessing, granted by the will of the Almighty, who allows fire to serve as a tool for human comfort. Without such heat, the long winters would have been far harsher, and daily life in the castle much more difficult. Meals in the hall were not always grand. For many days, the food was plain and simple: bread, grains, vegetables, and preserved goods that had been carefully stored. Only on certain occasions were more elaborate dishes served, depending on what the season provided. Eating together was not only about nourishment, but also about order and unity. Servants carried trays, cups were filled, and the entire household experienced the same rhythm of eating, speaking, and resting together. Beyond the public spaces, the castle also contained more private rooms. Chambers were smaller and quieter, sometimes hung with tapestries to block the draught and bring color to the heavy stone. These rooms often felt more personal, though they were rarely truly private. Servants and attendants moved in and out, ensuring the needs of the family were met. Still, compared to the noisy hall, such spaces offered moments of calm and reflection. In these chambers, One could find raised beds with thick blankets placed high from the cold floors. Chests and cupboards stored clothing and household goods, while small windows allowed narrow shafts of light to enter. At night, candles gave a soft glow, their steady light a reminder of how fragile and precious calmness was within the castle walls. These were the spaces where families rested, where conversations slowed, and where the weight of the day finally eased. Even in such surroundings, life was not only about duty. There were moments of learning, moments of quiet enjoyment, and moments of pause. Children of noble families were often taught in these rooms by tutors, who gave lessons in reading, writing, and useful skills. Books, though costly, might have been read aloud, while music from simple instruments filled the chambers. These were times when the castle felt less like a fortress, and more like a home, one where life unfolded with a rhythm both ordinary and deeply human. Education in a Tudor castle was considered essential for those of noble birth. Tutors might guide children through lessons in reading and writing, as well as mathematics and languages that were useful in diplomacy. Girls and boys alike were taught skills suited to their roles in society, though the details often differed. Alongside this learning, there were also practical lessons, manners at the table, responsibilities in the household, and the discipline required to manage a life of order. While learning filled part of the day, there was also space for leisure. Music was one of the most common forms of entertainment, with lutes, harps, and recorders producing soft and calming melodies that echoed through the stone halls. Some enjoyed simple board games, while others found delight in reading aloud. Walks in the gardens offered fresh air and a break from the cool, enclosed walls. These moments reminded the castle's inhabitants that life, even within stone walls, held time for both duty and rest. Castles also contained chapels, small places for prayer and reflection. These spaces were often quiet and simple, built not for grandeur but for devotion. Candles flickered, stone echoed softly with words spoken in prayer, and the stillness of the chapel provided a sense of pause from the noise of the household. For many, these moments of reflection gave balance to the responsibilities of daily life, a rhythm of thought and calmness that steadied the heart. As the day turned toward evening, the castle began to shift in mood. Fires were tended, torches were lit along the passageways, and servants made their final preparations. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of activity slowly faded. Children were guided toward their chambers, workers finished their duties, and the castle moved gently into the slower rhythm of night. At night, the castle felt entirely different. The echo of footsteps became fewer, the busy courtyard grew quiet, and only the guards at the gates remained fully awake. Their slow pacing in the torchlight added a steady, watchful presence. Within the chambers, candles burned low, and the weight of heavy blankets was drawn closer against the chill. The world outside might have felt uncertain, but within these walls there was stillness. The architecture itself seemed to breathe differently at night. Shadows stretched long across the stone floors, and narrow windows allowed only faint traces of moonlight to enter. The thick walls that had once echoed with movement now embraced the silence. It was in these hours that the castle revealed its most peaceful nature, not as a fortress or hall of power, but as a shelter for rest. In this setting, sleep carried a special significance. After the demands of the day duties, studies, and countless tasks, the calm of night allowed minds to settle. Gentle conversations might continue in hushed tones, or perhaps silence prevailed, broken only by the soft crackle of fading embers. Each household member, no matter their role, experienced this same quiet descent into rest. The rhythm of life inside a Tudor castle was a cycle of activity and pause. By day, movement and order filled the spaces, while by night, stillness and quiet returned. This balance shaped the way people lived, reminding them that even behind strong walls, the most important rhythms were often the simplest ones: work, reflection, and rest. Though centuries have passed, these details help us imagine the ordinary lives of those who once walked through these halls. Their routines may feel distant, yet they are also familiar. The search for warmth, the need for community, the desire for calm at the end of the day. These are threads that connect the past to our own present moments of quiet. And so, as we close this gentle journey into the life of a Tudor castle, we are reminded that history is not only made of great battles or dramatic events, it is also found in small routines, humble tasks, and peaceful nights. Just as the castle walls once held both busyness and calm, may these memories now help you find your own rest, guiding you softly towards sleep. When stepping inside a Tudor castle, the first impression often carried a sense of contrast. From the outside, the walls appeared unyielding and cold, built to withstand both time and threat. But within the gates, the castle revealed a softer reality, a community alive with movement, sound, and purpose. It was less a silent monument and more a place where life unfolded in countless small, familiar ways. The main courtyard was one of the busiest spaces. Horses shifted restlessly in their stables, their breath rising in the cool morning air. Servants carried baskets of food and supplies, while craftsmen tended to tools and repairs. The smell of smoke drifted from kitchens nearby, mixing with the scent of straw and fresh earth. It was here that the pulse of the castle could be felt most clearly, an energy of work and necessity that made the fortress function. Each person within these walls carried responsibilities that supported the whole. Stable hands cared for animals, while gardeners tended to herbs and vegetables that sustained the household. Carpenters mended doors and furniture, and blacksmiths sharpened tools or fashioned small fittings of iron. Every task, though ordinary, had its place in the larger rhythm of castle life. Without them, the grand walls would have been nothing more than empty stone. The kitchens were another vital heart of the castle. Large and often smoky, these spaces were filled with the steady rhythm of preparation. Pots simmered over open fires, bread baked in great ovens, and wooden tables were stacked with ingredients waiting to be prepared. Meals were not only about eating, but also about structure. The kitchens supplied order to the household, reminding everyone that nourishment was a daily anchor in the midst of responsibility. The water supply was equally important. Wells and cisterns provided access to what was most essential for life. Water was drawn carefully, carried to kitchens, wash areas, and chambers where it was needed. It was a reminder that even in a great stone fortress, survival still depended on the simplest of gifts, the flow of water that the Almighty made possible, without which no community could last. Guards also played their part in this daily rhythm. Though the Tudor period brought relative peace in some regions, vigilance was never abandoned. Men stood watch along the walls, paced slowly at the gates, and kept a steady presence as both protectors and reminders of order. Their role was not always dramatic, but their consistency ensured that those within could continue their lives with a sense of safety. Children, too, added to the life of the courtyard. While their education and duties shaped much of their day, they found small moments for play. A wooden toy or a simple game of chasing one another might break out between lessons. Their laughter, light, and unplanned, contrasted with the purposeful footsteps of workers, adding a note of liveliness to the castle's atmosphere. Visitors to the castle also experienced this layered rhythm. Arriving at the gates, they were greeted by guards before being led through the courtyard's activity. To some, the bustle might have seemed chaotic, but for those who lived there, it was a harmony of roles. Everyone understood where they belonged, and even the smallest duty contributed to the larger life of the castle. The chapel, often tucked quietly within the grounds, balanced this busyness with stillness. While the courtyard rang with sound, the chapel held a different tone, soft, steady, and reflective. Here, prayer and devotion gave the day its shape, reminding the household of order not just in work, but in thought and spirit. It was a rhythm of calm in contrast to the movement outside. In this way, the castle revealed itself not only as a fortress of defense, but as a place of daily survival and cooperation. Each stone wall framed a world of tasks, relationships, and routines. Within these walls, life was not defined by dramatic moments, but by the steady pulse of ordinary human effort. It was this balance between strength and daily rhythm that made the Tudor castle both imposing and quietly alive. The inner passages of the castle were narrow and often dim, winding like veins through the stone. Torches provided flickers of light, casting long shadows across the rough walls. These corridors connected the great rooms, kitchens, storage areas, and chambers, allowing the household to move with a rhythm that kept everything flowing. The sound of footsteps echoing softly was a constant companion to anyone walking alone. Storage rooms played a vital role in the life of the castle. Barrels, sacks, and baskets held food supplies that were carefully preserved to last through seasons of scarcity. Salted fish, dried beans, and grains were kept in large quantities, while herbs and vegetables from the gardens added variety. Though not always abundant, the stores represented security, the reassurance that the community within could endure even when the world outside grew harsh. Light was a precious resource. Narrow windows allowed thin shafts of daylight to enter, but much of the castle relied on fire and candlelight. The glow was soft and uneven, painting the stone in shades of gold and shadow. This gentle light created an atmosphere both solemn and calm, reminding its inhabitants of how fragile illumination could be and how carefully it was tended. In the evenings, the rhythm of the household slowed. Workers finished their duties, guards changed shifts, and families withdrew into smaller chambers. The courtyard, once filled with the sound of voices and movement, grew quiet. The stillness brought a different kind of presence to the castle, one of rest and anticipation for the coming day. Daily life inside a Tudor castle was built upon repetition. Tasks were performed at the same times, meals followed familiar patterns, and prayers gave structure to the hours. This repetition brought stability, reminding those who lived there that, even within great walls, it was routine that carried the days forward. The architecture itself shaped behavior. Staircases spiraled upward in tight turns, forcing slow steps. Heavy doors demanded effort to open and close, giving weight to even the simplest passage. The stone walls muffled sound, creating moments of silence even in the midst of activity. The castle was not only a home, but also a framework, guiding the movements of all who lived within. Moments of rest were valued deeply. Whether it was a pause to enjoy a simple meal, a quiet word exchanged in the courtyard, or time spent listening to the faint music of a lute, these intervals reminded the household of balance. The castle could be heavy and demanding, but it also sheltered moments of calm that made each day feel whole. At night, the atmosphere shifted once more. Guards at the gates stood firm, but most within had already sought rest. The fire burned low, casting faint glows on the walls. The sounds of the daywork voices and footsteps were replaced by stillness. This was when the true character of the castle emerged, a strong yet quiet place, holding both strength and peace. The life of a Tudor castle was not filled only with dramatic events. It was instead woven from countless small moments, tasks completed, lessons learned, prayers spoken, and nights endured. These pieces together formed the reality of existence within the walls, a rhythm of survival and routine that stretched far beyond the stone towers. The Great Hall was the heart of any Tudor castle. It was here that the household gathered, not only for meals but also for moments of ceremony, decision, and community. The hall itself was vast, with high timber-bird ceilings and stone walls hung with colourful tapestries to soften the cold. A large fireplace roared at one end, its heat pushing back the chill of the stone, while long wooden tables stretched in rows down the centre of the room. At the far end of the hall stood a raised platform, often called the dais. This was where the lord and his family sat, slightly elevated above the rest of the household. From this place, they oversaw meals and gatherings, their presence a reminder of order and hierarchy. Yet, despite this formality, the hall was also a shared space where many parts of castle life overlapped. Meals in the great hall followed a steady rhythm. Servants moved carefully, carrying trays of bread, vegetables, and other prepared foods. Cups were filled with water or ale, depending on what was available, and everyone sat in their designated places. The sound of eating mixed with conversation, creating a hum of life that filled the stone chamber. Though the meals were structured, they were not always extravagant. Much of the food was plain and practical, chosen to sustain rather than impress. Bread was eaten daily, vegetables were served according to the season, and preserved goods carried the household through leaner months. Only on special occasions were more elaborate dishes served, and even then, the focus was less on excess and more on order and tradition. The hall was also a place for gatherings beyond meals. Here, the lord might receive visitors, hear petitions, or make announcements to the household. The same space that held the clatter of dishes at midday could also fall silent in the evening as words of importance echoed beneath the rafters. The hall was both public and private, shifting in purpose, depending on the needs of the day. Above the hum of activity, the fireplace stood as a constant presence. Its flames offered warmth, its light softened the shadows, and its steady crackle became a backdrop to every gathering. Fire was a necessity in such large stone rooms, but it also gave comfort. It reminded all within that warmth itself is a blessing made possible by the Almighty, who allows creation to serve as a means of human survival. Seating arrangements reflected the structure of castle life. Those closest to the lord sat near the dais, while servants and attendants sat farther down the tables. This hierarchy was visible, yet it did not remove the sense of shared experience. All present, whether noble or servant, took part in the same rhythm of eating and listening, bound together by the walls of the hall. The atmosphere of the hall changed with the seasons. In summer, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting patterns across the floor. In winter, the fire became the heart of the room, with its glow reaching into every corner. The space adapted to the world outside, yet always remained central to the life within the castle. Sounds carried differently in the great hall. The scrape of benches against stone, the clatter of wooden cups, and the echo of voices rose toward the high ceiling. Even small movements seemed amplified, as though the room itself listened and remembered. For those who lived there, this soundscape was part of the rhythm of daily life. In quieter moments, when the hall was empty, it felt almost like another world. The long tables stood bare, the fire burned low, and the vast room seemed to hold its breath. The stillness was a reminder that even the busiest spaces have their pauses, when the noise fades and only silence remains. As evening approached, the great hall often became a place of quiet transition. The long tables that had hosted meals were cleared, benches were pushed aside, and the room took on a softer tone. The fire continued to glow, but its crackle grew gentler, casting shadows that danced along the tapestries. The grand chamber that had been filled with voices during the day slowly shifted toward calm. Music sometimes filled the space after supper. A small group of musicians might play a lute, a harp, or simple recorders, their notes echoing across the high ceiling. The sound softened the stone and gave warmth to the evening. Those who listened found a brief escape from the duties of the day, a reminder that life inside even the strongest walls could still carry moments of grace and beauty. Stories were also shared in the hall. Travelers brought news from afar, and elders passed down tales that connected the present to the past. Some stories were lessons, others simple amusements, but each added to the shared memory of the household. The great hall, in these moments, was more than stone and timber. It became a vessel for voices and memory. The light of torches and candles shaped the room into a patchwork of brightness and shadow. Clusters of people gathered where the light fell strongest, while the edges of the hall faded into quiet dimness. The flicker of flames gave the space an almost timeless quality, as though the room itself was suspended between the busy hours of the day and the stillness of night. For servants, the evening brought new duties. Trays were washed, floors were swept, and fires were tended carefully so they would last into the night. These quiet tasks were often unnoticed, yet they kept the rhythm of the castle steady. Even when others rested, the work continued, ensuring that the hall would be ready again with the dawn. The architecture of the hall, with its soaring beams and vast stone walls, reminded those inside of the balance between grandeur and necessity. The size impressed visitors, yet its true purpose was practical, to hold the entire household in one space, to feed them, to inform them, and to keep order within the castle. Every detail was shaped by the needs of community life. In moments of quiet, one might notice the details carved into the woodwork or woven into the tapestries. Designs of plants, animals, and patterns softened the severity of stone, offering touches of artistry in a world that often valued function over decoration. These small details gave the hall a sense of life, as though the walls themselves whispered stories of those who had come before. The great hall was more than a room. It was the pulse of the castle. It was where voices rose together, where silence settled when words carried weight, and where the fire always burned at the heart of the household. To imagine Tudor life without such a hall would be to leave out the very center of its rhythm. As night deepened, the hall finally grew still. The fire lowered to embers, benches stood empty, and the vast ceiling echoed only with silence. The room that had once been full of sound and movement now rested like the people it sheltered, waiting patiently for the next day to begin. And so, the great hall of a Tudor castle was both practical and symbolic. It was a place of meals, gatherings, music, stories, and rest. Within its walls, the daily life of the castle was both displayed and sustained. Though centuries have passed, the hall remains in memory as a reminder of how community and order were woven into the fabric of life behind stone walls. Public fountains and access to water were essential features of life in a Tudor castle. Behind the great walls, water had to be carefully managed, carried, and shared. Without it, the daily rhythms of cooking, washing, and cleaning could not continue. The sight of servants moving steadily with buckets and pitchers was as much a part of castle life as guards at the gate or fires in the hall. Wells were often the primary source of water. Dug deep into the earth, they reached the groundwater below, providing a steady flow that sustained the community within the castle walls. Drawing water was no small task. Buckets were lowered slowly, ropes creaked against the pulley, and the long climb upward demanded strength. Yet, without this labor, the household would not have functioned. Some castles also had cisterns, where rainwater was collected from rooftops and stored for use. These stone reservoirs ensured that water could be accessed even in drier seasons. It was a simple yet effective system, a reminder that survival often depended on careful planning and the patient gathering of resources. Water was carried to the kitchens first, where its role was most obvious. Pots and pans needed filling, bread and grains required washing, and vegetables had to be cleaned before cooking. The steady rhythm of water being poured and splashing into vessels was part of the unseen music of the kitchen, as constant as the crackle of firewood. Beyond the kitchen, water was also essential for washing. Laundry, though not frequent by modern standards, demanded effort. Clothes were scrubbed with care, rinsed in buckets or basins, and then hung to dry in open courtyards or along wooden racks. It was heavy work, but necessary for the order and cleanliness of the household. Bathing was less common than washing hands or faces, yet water still played its role in personal care. Bowls of clean water were brought into chambers, and cloths were used for wiping away dust and dirt. Though the castle walls might have seemed cold and unyielding, these small rituals of cleanliness brought comfort and relief. Public fountains within larger castle grounds also played a role. These fountains, often supplied by pipes that carried water from nearby springs, allowed servants and workers to draw what they needed. The sound of trickling water offered not only utility but also a sense of calm, a reminder of life's most basic and sustaining gift. For those who labored daily, access to water meant more than convenience. It was the foundation of survival, as vital as fire or shelter. To draw it, carry it, and share it among so many people was a task of constant repetition, yet one that carried immense importance. The management of water reflected the order of castle life itself. Just as meals, guards, and education followed a rhythm, so too did the use of water. Wells and cisterns, fountains and bucketsall were part of the structure that kept the community alive. In this way, water was not simply a resource, but the quiet thread woven through every aspect of life in the castle. It sustained kitchens, supported washing, and offered refreshment. Its presence reminded the people of the castle that even behind walls of stone, they were still dependent on the simplest blessings of creation. In many castles, water had to be shared carefully. Servants knew how much was needed for cooking, how much for cleaning, and how much could be spared for washing. Buckets were filled and refilled, carried along narrow passageways, and poured into basins. The simple act of transporting water shaped much of the daily rhythm inside the walls. At times, disputes arose when supplies ran low. On dry days or during busy seasons, the demand could outpace the flow of wells or cisterns. Careful management ensured that no part of the household was left without, and this balance reflected the importance of planning and patience in a community that depended on shared resources. The design of fountains often carried both beauty and purpose. Some were decorated with carved stone patterns, while others were plain and simple. serving only their function, regardless of appearance. Each fountain provided what was most needed: access to water that sustained both the body and the life of the castle. For the workers who relied on them daily, fountains and wells became familiar landmarks. They were places of quiet conversation while waiting for buckets to fill, or moments of pause in the midst of long duties. Even the steady trickle of water could bring a sense of calm, a background sound that softened the harder edges of stone life. In gardens, water played another role. Carefully guided through channels or carried by hand, it nourished herbs, vegetables, and fruit trees that added flavor and health to the meals of the household. The gardens themselves offered both beauty and practicality, spaces where life was tended carefully within the shadow of the castle walls. The presence of water shaped the rhythm of cleanliness. Floors were scrubbed, tables were wiped, and utensils washed daily. Without a steady flow of water, the order of the household would have quickly faltered. These small, repeated acts of care were as important to survival as the defenses built into the castle walls. Children, too, sometimes joined in the simple tasks of fetching or carrying small amounts. For them, it was less burden and more practice, a way of learning responsibility within the community. Each bucket carried taught the value of effort and the recognition that even the simplest labor contributed to the life of many. At night, the fountains and wells fell silent. Buckets stood ready for the morning, and only the guards passing by noticed their still presence. In the soft moonlight, the trickle of water seemed quieter, almost hidden, yet it remained steady, waiting for the cycle of the next day. The people of the castle may not have thought deeply about the flow of water each day, yet it was the unseen foundation of their survival. Its presence shaped meals, cleanliness, health, and comfort. Without it, even the strongest fortress could not last. And so, behind every great wall and tower, water carried its quiet influence. It was not celebrated with grandeur, but it was always present, sustaining life in ways that were constant and essential. The wells, fountains, and cisterns of a Tudor castle tell us that even in a world of stone and order, the simplest gifts of creation remained at the heart of survival. Life within a Tudor castle depended not only on its walls and towers, but on the countless people who worked each day to keep it alive. Behind the impression of grandeur was a world of ordinary responsibilities, carried out with steady rhythm and quiet persistence. Every role, no matter how small, contributed to the functioning of the whole. Servants made up much of the working force. They woke early, often before the sun rose, to prepare fires, carry water, and sweep the halls. Their work was invisible to many, yet without it, the castle could not have maintained its order. The echo of their footsteps through the corridors was one of the first sounds of each new day. In the kitchens, workers tended to tasks that were both demanding and constant. Fires were stoked, pots stirred, and supplies sorted into meals. Bakers rose early to prepare bread, while cooks ensured the day's food was ready in time for the great hall. The smell of baking and roasting drifted through the air, marking the steady pulse of activity. Stable hands worked with the horses, grooming, feeding, and preparing them for use. Horses were essential for transport, travel, and the image of the household itself. Caring for them was not only a matter of labor, but of trust. Each animal required patience, knowledge, and attention that stretched beyond simple routine. Guards maintained order at the gates and walls. Their presence was a reminder that the castle was not only a home, but also a place of security. By day, they observed those who came and went. By night, they paced slowly, keeping watch over sleeping chambers and silent courtyards. Their steady presence gave reassurance to those within the castle. Women also played essential roles. They managed households, oversaw servants, and ensured that clothing, supplies, and food were kept in balance. Their work often blended the practical with the organizational, tying together the countless small tasks into a system that allowed the castle to function smoothly. Children of noble families were not idle either. While their lives included lessons and study, they were also expected to learn responsibility, helping with small tasks, assisting attendants, or observing the duties of their elders gave them a sense of the roles they would eventually inherit. Craftsmen also found their place within castle life. Carpenters, blacksmiths, and stoneworkers were needed to repair doors, fashion tools, or maintain walls. Though the castle appeared strong and permanent, it required constant upkeep. Tools dulled, wood wore down, and stone weathered with time. The skills of these workers kept the structure steady. Messengers and clerks carried out quieter but equally important responsibilities. Letters needed writing, accounts needed keeping, and records were carefully stored. These written traces provided the order that kept trade, supplies, and communication running across the castle's lands. Together, these roles formed a community of labor. Though the tasks differed, they wove into the same pattern: to sustain life within the walls, to provide order, and to keep the household steady. The castle was more than stone, it was the sum of its workers, each thread tied into the larger fabric of daily existence. The daily rhythm of work in a Tudor castle followed the natural cycle of light. At dawn, the first fires were lit, and by dusk, tools were set aside as the household shifted into rest. Between these points, every hour carried tasks that demanded focus and energy. The castle itself seemed to breathe with this rhythm, alive through the motion of its workers. One of the heaviest labors involved maintaining the firewood supply. Logs had to be gathered, chopped, and carried into storerooms. Without this, the great halls, kitchens, and chambers would have grown unbearably cold. The work was tiring, yet it gave warmth to every corner of the castle. A reminder that simple effort often carried the greatest importance. Laundry, too, was a demanding duty. Clothes and linens were scrubbed by hand in basins of water, rinsed, and hung to dry. The process could take hours, and yet it was repeated week after week. Cleanliness was never taken for granted. It required steady hands and constant attention. Messengers often traveled beyond the castle walls, carrying news, instructions, or supplies between estates. Their journeys connected the household to the wider world, ensuring that the flow of information continued without interruption. In a time before quick communication, their work was essential to the order of life. Inside the walls, stewards and overseers watched carefully over the flow of goods. They recorded supplies, directed servants, and managed the distribution of food and resources. Their role was both practical and symbolic. They embodied the order that kept the castle steady, ensuring that nothing was wasted and everyone had what they needed. For many, work was repetitive, but it was also grounding. The repetition of carrying water, mending clothes, or sweeping floors gave a structure to each day. Within the walls of stone, where time might otherwise feel heavy, these patterns created stability and purpose. In times of busyness, such as when guests arrived or events were planned, the entire household shifted into greater activity. Servants hurried through the corridors, cooks prepared extra meals, and guards stood taller at their posts. The castle expanded its energy to meet the moment, showing how flexible and responsive the community within could be. Even with so many duties, moments of pause could be found. A servant might pause in the courtyard, listening to birdsong, or a craftsman might wipe sweat from his brow and look up at the sky before continuing. These small moments reminded those who labored that life within the castle was not only about duty but also about balance. By evening, the weight of the day's work settled into tired but steady bodies. The castle, which had echoed with footsteps, voices, and clatter, began to quiet. The cycle of labor ended, only to begin again at dawn. This endless pattern tied the lives of those within to the enduring rhythm of the stone walls, and so the work and responsibilities of a Tudor castle were not defined by grandeur but by necessity. Every role, from the humblest task to the most trusted duty, carried meaning. Together, they shaped the life of the household, turning a fortress of stone into a living, breathing community. Beyond the public halls and courtyards, life in a Tudor castle also unfolded in quieter spaces. These were the private chambers, reserved for families and their closest attendants. While the great hall echoed with voices and the courtyard bustled with movement, these rooms offered a more intimate rhythm, softer and more reflective. The chambers were often smaller than one might imagine. Thick stone walls surrounded the space, and narrow windows let in only a modest amount of light. To soften the cold, tapestries were hung across walls, not only as decoration but as insulation. Their colors and patterns broke the monotony of stone, bringing warmth where otherwise there would have been only gray. Beds in these chambers were often raised high from the floor, supported by wooden frames. Thick mattresses, layered with blankets, helped guard against the chill. Curtains sometimes surrounded the bed, offering both privacy and additional warmth. In the dim glow of a candle, the bed became the central place of comfort in the chamber. Storage was practical but carefully arranged. Chests of wood held clothing, linens, and valuables, while cupboards kept smaller items in order. Each piece of furniture was built for both strength and function, its presence reminding the household of the need for careful management of limited space. The hearth, when present, was smaller than the grand fireplaces of the hall, but no less significant. Its fire glowed steadily, providing both heat and reassurance. Even a small flame made the chamber feel more like a refuge, a reminder that warmth was always a gift that turned heavy walls into a home. Light in these rooms was gentle and fragile. A narrow shaft of sunlight might pass through a slit in the stone by day, while at night the flicker of a candle or lantern gave a soft, golden glow. Shadows stretched long across the floor, and the play of light and dark created a calming stillness. Though quieter than the public spaces, these chambers were not always truly private. Servants and attendants entered frequently, carrying water, preparing clothing, or ensuring the needs of the household were met. Yet compared to the bustling hall, they still offered a sense of retreat from the larger rhythm of the castle. It was in these chambers that conversations became more personal. Families spoke in softer tones, reflecting on the day or planning for what was ahead. The stone walls held these voices closely, making the words feel more intimate than those spoken in the echoing halls. Moments of reflection often took place here. Whether through reading, quiet prayer, or simple silence, the chambers allowed individuals to step back from the demands of duty. Within their walls, the pace of life slowed, and thoughts could unfold without interruption. These spaces reminded those within the castle that life was not only about community and order, but also about rest. Just as the great hall symbolized unity, the chambers symbolized retreats, more human spaces within a fortress of stone. Clothing often lay neatly folded within these private rooms, cared for with attention. Wool, linen, and sometimes finer fabrics were stored carefully to protect them from wear. The presence of these garments was not only practical, but also a sign of preparation, ensuring that each day began with order and readiness. Books and writing materials, when available, also found their place in these chambers. Though books were still costly, some households kept them as prized possessions. Reading by the soft glow of candlelight brought knowledge, reflection, and calm. Writing, too, was done here, with records, letters, and notes kept within the safety of stone walls. Musical instruments sometimes added another layer of life. A lute resting in the corner, or a small harp beside a chest, served as reminders that these chambers were not only for sleep but also for gentle moments of art. Soft notes played in the evening brought comfort, a soothing counterpoint to the heaviness of the stone around them. Children often shared smaller adjoining chambers, their beds lined in neat rows. These spaces echoed with quieter sounds than the halls, filled with whispers, soft laughter, and the settling of blankets. It was here that lessons of responsibility began, as children learned to order their small world before taking on larger roles. Attendants who served the family lived nearby, ready to respond when called. Their presence blurred the line between privacy and service, yet it also created a sense of closeness within the household. Even in private spaces, life in the castle was never truly solitary. The air in these rooms was often cool, carrying the faint scent of smoke from nearby hearths or the clean, earthy smell of stone. Fabrics, blankets, and tapestries softened it, but the atmosphere always reminded one that they lived within a fortress, where nature and structure intertwined. In winter, the chambers became sanctuaries. Fires burned longer, blankets grew thicker, and every corner carried the effort to keep out the chill. These adjustments revealed the resilience of daily life, how people adapted to the seasons within the limits of their stone home. In the stillness of night, the chambers felt far removed from the busy life of the castle. The muffled sounds of the courtyard faded, and only the crackle of fire or the faint call of guards outside reached through the walls. Sleep came gently in these moments, wrapping itself around the inhabitants like the blankets on their beds. The privacy of these spaces also allowed for reflection on faith, on family, and on the passage of time. The chambers were more than stone and wood. They were places where thoughts deepened and where memories were quietly formed. And so, the private chambers of a Tudor castle carried their own balance of duty and peace. They were not grand like the halls, nor bustling like the courtyards, but they held the most human parts of castle life: rest, closeness, and the small details that gave meaning to each day. Education held a central place in the lives of those who grew up within Tudor castles. For children of noble families, learning was not only a privilege, but also a duty, preparing them for the responsibilities they would one day inherit. The lessons were often held within private chambers or small study rooms, where tutors guided them with patience. Reading and writing were considered essential skills. Boys and girls alike were introduced to letters, words, and the careful practice of handwriting. The scratch of quills on parchment echoed softly in quiet chambers, creating a rhythm of focus and discipline. These moments of study were steady, shaping not only knowledge, but also character. Mathematics also played a role in this education. Counting, measuring, and understanding accounts were skills needed to manage estates and resources. Lessons were often simple but practical, rooted in the needs of daily life rather than abstract theory. The purpose of knowledge was always tied to its usefulness. Languages were another important subject. Latin remained valuable for reading certain texts, while French was studied for diplomacy and communication. Children repeated words aloud, slowly shaping their voices to unfamiliar sounds. Each lesson prepared them to take part in a wider world beyond the stone walls of the castle. Music was also woven into their education. Tutors taught the playing of instruments such as the lute, the recorder, or small harps. Beyond skill, music offered calm and discipline, filling chambers with soft melodies that eased the heaviness of stone. These lessons provided not only learning but also comfort. Girls often received additional instruction in household management. They learned how to organize servants, keep accounts, and oversee supplies. These lessons gave them the skills to manage estates with care and foresight, roles that were as essential to survival as any guard on the wall. Boys, meanwhile, might be introduced to matters of leadership. They observed the decisions of their elders, learned how to manage workers, and studied the responsibilities of governance. While still young, they were prepared for the weight of authority that awaited them in adulthood. Not all learning was formal. Children absorbed knowledge by watching those around them, whether servants preparing meals, gardeners tending to plants, or craftsmen repairing tools. These quiet observations added to the lessons of tutors, grounding education in the rhythm of everyday life. Play, too, was part of their learning. Simple games with wooden toys or balls taught coordination, patience, and the joy of shared company. Though their lives carried responsibility, moments of laughter balanced the seriousness of study. In this way, education in a Tudor castle was not confined to books or tutors alone. It was a blend of study, observation, and practice, woven into every part of daily life. Each lesson, no matter how small, shaped the children into the people they would one day become. Beyond formal study, leisure was an important balance in castle life. Even within the walls of stone, people sought ways to enjoy moments of quiet or gentle amusement. These pastimes helped to ease the structure of daily duty and brought comfort to long days. Music, already a part of education, often became a pastime in its own right. Families and attendants might gather to listen as someone played the lute or harp, their melodies carrying softly through the chambers. The sound transformed the heavy atmosphere of the castle, making it feel warmer, calmer, and more human. Storytelling was another cherished activity. Elders and tutors shared tales of the past, while travelers brought news from distant places. These stories connected listeners to the wider world, sparking imagination while also teaching lessons of history, morality, and perseverance. Games filled quieter hours as well. Simple board games, played on wooden boards with carved pieces, allowed for both competition and laughter. Dice games, though modest, brought entertainment to servants and nobles alike, showing how play crossed the lines of hierarchy. Books, though rare and costly, also provided enjoyment. When a household had access to them, they were read aloud so that many could share in the words. The act of listening became as important as the reading itself, giving rhythm and calm to those gathered around. Walks in the gardens or along the castle grounds gave relief from the enclosed walls. The scent of herbs, the sight of fruit trees, and the sound of birds all reminded inhabitants of the natural world beyond the stone. These strolls offered not only rest, but also reflection, softening the weight of responsibility. Children found play in the simplest of objects. A carved wooden figure, a ball made from cloth, or a hoop rolled along the ground could bring hours of delight. Their laughter echoed lightly across courtyards, adding a touch of brightness to the castle's solemn rhythm. For adults, conversation itself became a pastime. In chambers or halls, people gathered to discuss events, exchange ideas, or simply share thoughts at the end of the day. These words, spoken softly in the glow of firelight, strengthened bonds within the household. Feasts and gatherings also provided moments of leisure, though they were not daily occurrences. On such occasions, music, stories, and laughter filled the hall, offering a reminder that life within a fortress could hold joy as well as duty. Thus, education and pastimes together gave balance to castle life. Learning prepared the young for responsibility, while music, games, and stories reminded everyone of the importance of rest. These moments of study and leisure, woven side by side, created the rhythm that made life in a Tudor castle not only survivable but meaningful. Within the walls of a Tudor castle, faith held a quiet but steady place in daily life. Just as meals and work gave structure to the hours, so too did moments of devotion and reflection. These practices shaped the rhythm of the day, reminding the household of values beyond their immediate duties. Most castles contained a chapel, often small compared to the great hall, yet central to the life of the community. Its walls were simple, its design plain, but its purpose was profound. Here, families, servants, and attendants gathered together, their voices soft within the stone chamber. The chapel was a place of stillness in contrast to the busyness outside, where the courtyard rang with movement and the hall echoed with chatter. The chapel offered silence broken only by quiet footsteps or the murmur of prayer. It was here that the mind could pause, stepping away from the demands of daily labor. Candles lined the chapel, their flames flickering gently against the stone. Their glow softened the shadows, turning the cool grey walls into something warmer. The steady light was fragile, but it was also calming, a reminder that even in heavy darkness, a small flame could bring comfort. Prayer was a daily rhythm. It was not grand or theatrical, but woven into the fabric of life. Families bowed their heads together, servants paused from their duties, and words of reflection rose softly within the chamber. These moments steadied the heart and reminded the household of humility and patience. Seasons shaped devotion as well. During times of harvest or hardship, prayers carried different weights and times, gratitude, sometimes hope for endurance. The chapel echoed these shifting moods, holding the emotions of the household as they passed through its doors. For the young, the chapel was also a place of learning. They observed elders, listened to readings, and learned the rhythm of words spoken in unison. In these lessons, they discovered not only ritual but also the comfort of structure, the knowledge that faith gave meaning to their days. The architecture of the chapel, though modest, guided reflection. Narrow windows allowed only thin shafts of light, which shifted as the sun moved. The passage of time itself was marked not by clocks, but by the slow journey of brightness across the floor. Music sometimes accompanied these gatherings, a soft voice, a gentle hymn, or the faint sound of a lute turned devotion into something both solemn and beautiful. The music filled the chapel's quiet spaces, lingering in the air long after the notes had faded. In these ways, the chapel became more than stone and timber. It was a sanctuary, a place where thoughts were calmed, hearts were steadied, and the household found balance between the demands of work and the peace of reflection. Beyond its daily role, the chapel also marked important moments in the life of the household. Births, unions, and farewells all passed through its walls, leaving behind quiet traces of memory. Though the events differed in scale, the chapel remained constant, a space where the rhythm of human life was reflected with dignity and calm. The servants, too, found comfort within its silence. For many, their duties filled each hour of the day, yet in the chapel, they could pause, gather their thoughts, and feel a sense of rest. It was a reminder that even those with the heaviest burdens were given space for reflection. The Lord and his family often had a special place within the chapel, but in practice, all members of the household shared the same air, the same flickering light, and the same words of prayer. In this way, the chapel became an equalizing space where status mattered less than sincerity. The rhythm of faith gave strength to endure hardship. In times of scarcity, when food was limited or illness spread, the chapel offered a place to seek comfort and patience. The act of gathering together itself brought reassurance, reminding the community that they were not alone in their struggles. Seasons of plenty also found expression in the chapel. Songs of gratitude echoed through the stone, rising in voices that filled the small chamber. The joy of abundance was never taken for granted, for those within the castle understood how fragile fortune could be. The simplicity of the chapel reflected its purpose. There were no extravagant decorations, no overwhelming displays of wealth, only plain stone, timber benches, and the gentle light of candles. This humility helped keep focus on what truly mattered: reflection, guidance, and gratitude. Children, watching and listening, learned that faith was not confined to a single moment, but woven into daily life. The lessons of the chapel carried with them into adulthood, shaping their sense of duty and grounding their actions with quiet values. In the stillness of night, when the chapel stood empty, the faint smell of candle wax and the hush of stone seemed to hold echoes of the day's prayers. It was as if the walls themselves carried memory, keeping safe the words spoken within them. Though centuries have passed, the presence of these chapels reminds us that even in times of power and grandeur, life was guided by reflection. The smallest rooms often carried the greatest weight, shaping the thoughts of those who lived within. And so, the chapel of a Tudor castle was not only a place of devotion but also a sanctuary of peace. It steadied the rhythm of daily life, offered comfort in hardship, and gave meaning to the passing of time within walls of stone. As the sun set beyond the castle walls, the atmosphere inside began to change. The lively sounds of footsteps, voices, and work slowly faded, replaced by a gentler rhythm. Shadows lengthened across the courtyard, and the glow of torches took the place of fading daylight. The castle, so full of motion by day, began to settle into stillness. Servants completed their final tasks before nightfall. Fires were dampened, tables cleared, and tools put away. Buckets of water stood ready for the morning, and corridors were swept one last time. These final acts of preparation ensured that the household could rest. Knowing the work of the day had been brought to a close, the guards at the gates remained alert. While most of the castle settled into sleep, they continued their steady watch, pacing back and forth with quiet footsteps. Their presence was constant, a reminder that even in rest, the safety of the household was carefully guarded. Within the chambers, families withdrew to the privacy of their rooms. Heavy blankets were drawn close, fires burned low in small hearths, and candles flickered softly against stone walls. The intimate glow of lamplight created a gentler world, far removed from the busyness of the day. The courtyards, once noisy with voices and the clatter of tools, fell into silence. Only the faint sound of wind brushing against stone or the distant hoot of an owl disturbed the stillness. These natural sounds became part of the castle's nightly rhythm, reminding its people of the world beyond the walls. Windows, narrow and tall, revealed glimpses of the night sky. Stars glittered faintly above, and the moon cast a silver glow on the towers. For those who paused to look, The sight brought a sense of perspective. How small even the strongest castle seemed beneath the vastness of the heavens. In the great hall, where voices had once filled the air, the silence was almost startling. The long tables stood empty, the fireplace burned to embers, and only shadows lingered in the corners. The hall seemed to breathe quietly, as if resting after a long day of service. Servants who remained awake moved carefully, their footsteps hushed. They checked doors, tended to small fires, or carried messages between chambers. Their work was quiet but necessary, allowing the rest of the household to remain undisturbed in their rest. The scent of smoke and wax drifted gently through the air, mingling with the coolness of stone. These familiar smells gave a sense of continuity, a reminder that even as the castle slept, life continued in subtle ways. And so, as night deepened, the castle transformed. What had been a bustling community became a place of silence and rest. Its walls, strong by day, now embraced the quiet, offering protection not only from the outside world, but also from the noise of daily life. The rhythm of night within the castle was slow and measured. Time seemed to stretch, marked not by the sound of bells or voices, but by the steady pacing of guards and the faint crackle of fading fires. The stillness gave the impression that the castle itself had fallen into slumber. In the private chambers, conversations grew quieter as sleep approached. Families spoke in hushed tones, reflecting on the events of the day or planning for tomorrow. Soon even these whispers faded, leaving only the gentle sound of breathing beneath the heavy blankets. Some attendants remained nearby, ready if called upon. Their presence was discreet, moving silently through the shadows. They checked on fires, adjusted curtains, and ensured that the smallest needs of the household were met, even in the middle of the night. The architecture shaped the night in its own way. Thick stone walls muffled most sounds, making the world outside feel distant and far away. Within those walls, every creak of wood or flicker of flame became more noticeable, giving the castle a character of watchful silence. Animals in the stables also rested. Horses shifted gently, their movements soft against the straw. Dogs lay curled at the doors, serving as both companions and guards. Even the animals seemed attuned to the rhythm of stillness that settled over the castle each evening. From the highest towers, the night sky appeared vast and unbroken. The moon's light touched rooftops and battlements, outlining the shape of the castle in silver. To those awake in the late hours, the sight offered a reminder of how the world stretched far beyond the walls. Within the chapel, quiet persisted. Candles burned low, leaving only faint traces of smoke. The silence there was deeper than in any other room, holding the memory of prayers spoken earlier in the day. At night, it became a sanctuary of calm, even without a single voice to fill it. Dreams unfolded gently in the chambers. For those who worked tirelessly by day, rest was a form of renewal, a chance to gather strength before the duties of tomorrow. The night was a gift of balance, a pause that gave meaning to the labor of the hours before. The castle at night was both fortress and home. It stood strong against the darkness outside, yet within it carried warmth, calm, and rest. This dual nature, strength and stillness, was what made it endure through centuries. And so, each night closed with silence. Fires dimmed to ash, voices quieted, and the castle became a vessel of peace. Until the first light of dawn returned, the walls held both the weight of history and the gentle rhythm of sleep. As we reach the close of our journey through the Tudor castle, we are left with an image not only of walls and towers, but of the lives that once filled them. The sound of footsteps in the courtyard, the warmth of the great hall, the rhythm of duties, and the quiet of the chambers all together paint a picture of daily existence within stone walls. The castle was a world of contrasts. It was strong yet vulnerable, grand yet ordinary, bustling yet often quiet. Within it, people lived structured lives shaped by work, faith, and rest. It was these small patterns, repeated each day, that allowed the community to endure. We saw how water flowed through wells and fountains, how meals were prepared with patience, how families rested in their chambers, and how prayers rose softly in chapels. These details remind us that life in the past, though different in setting, was built upon the same needs we still recognize today. The castle by day was alive with motion, voices, and the clatter of tasks. Yet by night, it settled into stillness, holding its people safely within while the world outside turned dark. This balance between busyness and calm gave the castle its unique rhythm, one that endured for centuries. History often remembers the Tudors for their rulers and great events, but within these walls, it was ordinary life that carried the truest meaning. It was not only kings and queens who shaped the age, but also servants, guards, children, and families whose efforts sustained the castle each day. Even the strongest walls would have meant little without the steady work of countless hands. Their unseen labors, their small acts of care, and their quiet endurance were what truly gave life to these castles. In this way, history is not only the story of power, but also of persistence. The memory of Tudor castles invites us to slow down, to notice the details, and to reflect on how human lives were once shaped by stone, fire, and routine. These lessons reach across the centuries, connecting us to the rhythm of the past. And now, as we close this gentle journey, imagine the castle resting once more. Its fires are low, its halls are silent, and its people are wrapped in sleep. The story of their day is complete, but the memory of their lives continues to echo softly through time. Thank you for listening to this story. May its quiet rhythm guide you gently toward your own rest tonight, reminding you of the peace found in ordinary moments. If you enjoy these calm journeys into history, I invite you to subscribe and gently turn on the notification bell so you can continue exploring the past with us. In our next journey together, we will turn to a very different time and place as we explore why did the Vikings settle in Greenland.